Hello, and welcome to the Be Purely Balanced podcast. I'm Dr. Crystal Couture, and today I'm here with Ashley Matthews. Ashley is inspired by the Buddhist idea that our suffering stems from attaching to things that change. Ashley became a certified yoga teacher while pursuing her undergraduate degree. She is grateful for learning early on that yoga is a state of being, rather than something to be obtained. Ashley's purpose, or dharma, as yoga teachers, crystallized when one of her regular students confided that attending her classes helped her in her battle with depression. Comforted by the moon's unchanging presence in the sky, no matter where her journeys took her, she became a certified alchemical astrologer in 2017 as a way to learn more deeply about herself and her soul's path. Ashley weaves the wisdom of yoga with the knowledge of the stars into her yoga classes, retreats, and one-on-one natal and predictive chart readings in the Newburyport, Massachusetts area. Growing up on Plum Island gave Ashley a lifelong connection to the ocean and its teaching that, like the waves, life is impermanent, which ultimately became the motivation behind naming her practice Ride the Wave Yoga, Meditation, and Astrology. Riding the wave is the practice of allowing things to just be as they are without resisting or grasping, the key to experiencing radical joy in this moment. Welcome, Ashley.
Hi, Crystal. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's an honor to have you, and I'm so excited. Today, our topic is alchemical astrology, and I can't wait for us to dive in together.
Yay. Thank you. I'm so excited too.
So, Ashley, I would love for you to share with our listeners your story of transformation from working in marketing to becoming a yoga teacher and an alchemical astrologer.
Absolutely. I'd love to share that. So I went to school. I went to university in Tampa, Florida, and I'm originally from Plum Island, Massachusetts, as you stated. I went to school in 2010, not really knowing exactly where my path was going to lead me. And for that reason, I chose a major in communication because I knew that I loved being around people and talking and really just learning. I'm very open to learning about different things. So I, of course, majored in communication. I took a philosophy course my sophomore year in college, and that introduced me to principles behind Buddhism and Hinduism, introduced me really to the philosophy behind yoga. And so I was really inspired by that class. Dr. Steve Geis at UT taught that course. And so I started teaching yoga in college. When I was there, I picked up a double minor in philosophy and international studies. And I'm a Sagittarius, and Sagittarians often are sort of the philosophers. They're interested in higher knowledge and foreign culture. So that was really fitting to me. And I had not known about astrology until after I graduated college. So looking back on my life, it's amazing to have the knowledge I have now and see how things have lined up according to the stars. It's fascinating. So I took a few courses in digital marketing, and eventually ended up with an internship that was focused in marketing. Long story short, kind of long journey short, took a couple positions within sales, and I helped small businesses connect with other companies in the area, relocated companies in Tampa to grow their bottom line. And it's always just been a passion of mine to talk to new people, meet new people. I'm inspired by different people. And so, yeah, basically I graduated and worked in corporate for about 2 years off and on before I realized I'm really destined to sort of be my own boss. And so I quit my job and took a couple gigs tending bartending, and eventually started teaching yoga full-time now about a year and a half. So it was risky and scary, but ultimately I wouldn't have it any other way. Being my own sort of boss is the greatest. It's awesome.
So at what age did you become attracted to the stars, the planets, and the sky? Because it sounds like you weave them into every conversation that you and I have. There's like these little facets, you know, of it. So I'm just curious, when did you know?
It's a great question. Actually, I can sort of pinpoint the month and year. It was about like November of 20, would have been 2010. I was a freshman in college, and first time really being far away from my home. I was surrounded by new people. UTampa is a very international school in that it accepts students from all over the world. So being introduced to this new environment really kind of made me homesick. I was pretty homesick for my freshman year. And in November of 2010, I remember being at somebody's house outside at a little gathering in South Florida, and looking up at the stars and just seeing the moon and the stars, and remembering a time when I was on the beach at home on Plum Island, looking up and just marveling at that sky. It immediately drew me to a sense of home and place and belonging. So that was really the peak of becoming interested in the stars and looking up. I really found a lot of solace there. And maybe a year and a half later, came home from school for Christmas break, and I picked up a book. And I'll share with you the name, The Secret Language of Relationships by Gary Goldschneider and Joost Elfers. And it's about an 800-page book, and it talks about how we relate to individuals based on the week in which we were born. And I just stuck my nose in that book the whole Christmas break. I couldn't stop reading about friends and ex-boyfriends and family members, and it was all just so accurate. And I was amazed at how accurate this book was in sort of outlining our general tendencies and how we can relate to others based on our astrological makeup.
Wow.
So I recommend that book if you're new to astrology.
For sure. I think every one of us could be super interested in a book like this, because it sounds like it gave you great insight into the way that different relationships aligned and, of course, how they resolved.
Yes. Yeah, definitely a lot of just affirmation that was there.
Yeah, for sure. You know, as I think to myself about looking out to our sky, right, I instantly feel this shift in perspective, and I always feel the sense of being closer to spirit, awareness, and expansion. It like instantly kind of drops in for me. So what do you believe to be the connection between humans and the sky?
It's a great question, Crystal, and it comes back to this fact that humans have always had a connection to the sky. They always knew to look up when they had a major question about the larger meaning of things. It's astrology, historically, it's a method of tracking patterns and explaining phenomena, both, celestial and terrestrial. Because the sky is larger than us, it may be able to provide answers. At least that's what we've thought as humans for thousands of years. If you look back, every culture has had their own form of astrology. And the first real sighting of humans connecting terrestrial events to lunar activity and celestial activity happened, it dates back to the Homo sapien era. And Homo sapiens were found, in fact, buried with animal bones that had 28 notches carved into them, marking off the 28 days of the lunar month.
Wow.
So it's ingrained in us. As above, so below, it goes the saying. And so, ancient cultures, they track the movement of these planets in the sky. Planet is Greek for wanderer, and people would notice, there's certain fixed stars in the sky, but then there's also these moving stars, and they'd correlate that movement to the movement or events that were happening on the earth. So this is called mundane astrology. Mundus is Roman for world, so world astrology, seeing how the planets affect us on the earth.
Whoa. Yeah. Mind blown.
It is. It's crazy.
So why don't we get into the definition of what is alchemical astrology? Let's start there to sort of clean things up so that people have an idea of what we're talking about from, the simplest sense. And then we can dive into the more woo-woo aspects of energies and connections and whatnot.
Absolutely. Yeah. So alchemical astrology, I'm a certified astrologer under Alana Kaivalya, who's named her program Alchemical Astrology. Alchemy really is the ancient and scientific practice of changing base metals into other substances such as gold. Once seen as an occult practice, it revealed secrets that could literally change or transform or alchemize people's lives. And it used to be reserved for just royalty for that reason. Now has been, through astrology and through programs like Alana's, this power, this transformation available to us has been placed back into our own hands. So alchemical astrology really is looking at our birth chart, a picture of where the planets were in the sky at the time of our birth, and observing how we are exhibiting or living out the energies of the planets themselves. Astrology, alchemical astrology, really, I see it as an awareness tool that we have, and we need to be aware first before we can make any sort of change or transformation. So the birth chart provides that for us. I've found it to be an amazing complement to my practice as a yoga teacher, just personally, and for my clients teaching yoga. It's a great way to get through the day, but ultimately we'd like to have some sort of explanations or a roadmap for our lives, and that's something astrology can provide to us.
Wow. So the idea of the planets and how the planets are positioned and how the planets essentially move about as wanderers, so to speak, directly impacts us at that time of birth.
Right.
And we, I guess, as spirits are probably choosing alignment with the planets as we see, if we go that far into our belief pattern. So we're talking about the planets like the scientific planets, right? We're talking about, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Earth, etc., right?
Correct. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So why don't we talk a little bit about the planets and what their energies feel like and what those relationships feel like?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's some like buzzwords and keywords in astrology that might be helpful to clarify for us. Right now, we're talking about planets, so those personal planets, the planets that are immediately visible by the naked eye: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. So those all are representative of parts of our own psyche. For example, Mercury, the messenger god, he rules the way we communicate and the way we think, exchange ideas. Venus, the planet of love, the goddess of love, talks about our need for love, to find and seek beauty in our lives, things like balance. Mars, the god of war, he represents this innate need for all of us to be courageous in our lives, stand up for what we believe in, go to war if necessary, and so on and so forth. Jupiter, the planet of the king of the gods, he's the largest planet in the universe. So he represents our ability to expand and share, whether it's ideas or possessions. Saturn is the god of world and time, and he tells us, he reminds us that it's important to get down to work, that we only have a certain amount of time within which to complete our work. It's a very contractive planet as opposed to Jupiter, which is more of the expansive planet. And so we all have these needs and desires and qualities within us to love, to speak, to act, to share, to work. And wherever the planets were at the time of your birth, whichever sign was ruling that planet tells you as a human being the way that you might act out these innate principles or qualities. So for example, my moon, the moon is also, moon and sun are also included in the personal planets. The moon tells us our primal needs and our emotional needs. The moon in the sign of Libra, which is the sign it was in when I was born, Libra is a sign, one of the zodiacal signs, the 12 signs, that represents harmony and balance and aesthetic pleasure and beauty. So for me, my moon in Libra, wherever I am, especially at home, because this planet for me in my birth chart is in the 4th house of home and parents, wherever I am, especially at home, I'm seeking out harmony and balance. And I like to have my environment be pleasurable to the eye and to the nose and to the ears. I like to, I'm a singer, so I appreciate harmony and nice, pleasurable sound, being surrounded by that, or whether I'm making it myself. So it's very fascinating. I hope that cleared up a little bit about the immediate planets, at least.
Totally. So the personal planets are those planets that are visible to us, which is cool for me to hear, because, as someone who it works with healing, right, of all different kinds, as I've been studying Chinese medicine, and cranial sacral therapy sort of together, the cranial bones are each associated with a planet. Yet I was always fascinated because some of the planets were missing. So you just cleared up a big gap for me. And now I realized they were talking about the visible planets. Yeah, which is awesome.
Yeah, personal planets are innate needs. Those are the moon, the sun, Mercury, Venus, and Mars. Then Jupiter and Saturn actually are called sort of the social planets. After we've sort of dealt with the inner workings of our own needs and self, then we look at Jupiter and Saturn to see how we're interacting with the world.
Makes sense.
People around us. And Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto are the transpersonal planets, or they sort of describe generations because they're much more, they take a lot longer to move around us on Earth. So whereas the personal planets, they move much more quickly, anywhere between, so the moon is the quickest moving planet of all. 2.5 days it takes to go around the ecliptic, whereas Venus and Mars, they take roughly a bit longer than the moon. So
yeah,
and Pluto takes forever. Yeah.
So now you also mentioned 2 other concepts. You also mentioned the zodiac and the idea of houses. So if you want to just briefly give us some definitions, because I think these are things that, as people are curious about what is my sign, what is my this, they start reading, but they're, not always aware. So why don't we go into what is the zodiac and then follow that up with what are the houses?
Absolutely. So the zodiac, basically it's a term that describes the 12 30-degree segments of longitude in the sky that comprise the whole circle, the 360-degree circle of the whole sky. 12 is a sacred number. 12 sort of sections of the sky. They're divided up to show us the houses, which tell us the areas of life that we experience from birth all the way through death. So 30-degree segments, these 30-degree segments shift in the sky, and whatever whatever house is rising above the eastern horizon at the time of your birth is going to tell you what your rising sign is. And I say sign or house because each house is ruled by a different sign traditionally. But at the same time, the houses are moving in the sky. The signs are moving in the opposite direction. So you're not always going to get the exact matchup. You have a 1 in 12 chance of having your rising sign be Aries. That's the start of the seasonal year for us here in the West. So the houses are the 12 segments of the zodiac, and the planets can fall anywhere within those houses when you're born, at the time of your birth. And where they fall can tell us a lot about where our focus is going to be in our life. For example, the second house of our possessions, our safety, money, the things that we can touch and feel and just use to feel very safe and secure and simple, are themes of the second house. And if you've got a stack up of planets in that house, you've got a pretty big focus on that area of your life in this lifetime. Seventh house being partnerships. If you have some planets in there, depending on what planet it is, what sign it is, it's gonna tell you a lot about the way you interact with romantic partners or just anybody one-on-one. That house deals with one-on-one relationships. So we could go through like the whole zodiac for sure. But essentially our souls, they're making this journey through the zodiac. And in this life, we're given the life we're given. The planets in the certain houses represent the themes that we have to work with in this life. And each planet, whatever sign it's in, it has both a high and a low side expression of itself. So what the birth chart gives to us is a roadmap. And we can see based on what signs the planets are in, what houses the planets are in, where we might be living in the high side expression or in the low side expression of that sign. And as I mentioned, so astrology as an awareness tool, it just can tell us a lot about the way we're living now, and it gives us the choice. It really empowers us to choose whether we want to live more in the high side expression, which hopefully is what we all want to be living in, or the low side expression. So yeah.
This is where the alchemic or alchemical part of the astrology comes in, because we're taking the chart, we're working with the interpretation, and then we're experiencing life almost through the messages and the reality that is our birth chart and our alignment. And that's where healing can happen, right? That's where we can begin to catch on to our desires. We can begin to experience the things that we're really wishing to experience because our awareness is greater.
Absolutely. Yes. And I think yoga as a follow-up to astrology, it just works. It gives us the resources to sort of create more space around the way that we've run our lives in the past, so far. And it frees ourselves up to make choices going forward. So the two, I think, work really synonymously together.
So once again, what we're really talking about here, which is so often what we end up talking about on the Be Purely Balanced podcast, is deepening one's relationship with themselves, getting to know themselves on a deeper level, and essentially broadening their perspective of what's possible.
Yes, absolutely. Yep.
Cool.
Yeah, that's what it's about. I don't know if that was a question or a statement. I think it was a statement, but if it was a question, let me know how I can answer it.
It was sort of worded a little bit open-ended, but I guess the yes is the affirmation there.
Yeah.
So what does the everyday person need to know about astrology? What is the most important component or components that they can use and really relate to their life? This may be if they don't have access to their chart, or don't know all the details. Maybe they know their sign. What's the most important bits that they want to know, because they'll help them out in a tremendous way?
Absolutely. So the first piece of advice I have is to seek out an astrologer near to you, or it doesn't even have to be near to you. A lot of astrologers work over the phone, myself included, and have that astrologer give you a birth chart reading. You can have a natal chart reading. But if that is not for you at the time, financially or just timing wise, and you'd still like to get some information about how you can use the knowledge of the stars in your own life, astro.com, that's astro.com, we can give you your birth chart. And sometimes they'll have interpretations there online for you. But it's always helpful. I always recommend having your first natal chart reading in person, because it really is a conversation. And a lot of times we read things on Facebook or online, and it gives us just a sort of a one-way definition of what our sign is, say our sun sign, for example. And when really we're all changing beings, we're shifting beings, and astrology is really more of a coaching process than it is an astrologer telling his or her client how their fate, is going to look. So through conversation, you can have some of your questions answered a little bit more accurately. However, if you do want to go on astro.com, you just need to know your birth time and place. Try to get the time to the exact minute. And if you don't know your time, you can telephone the city or the town in which you were born, and they should have that on file if it's not on your birth certificate. But essentially, once you go there, the three main planets or the three main aspects of your chart that you're probably going to want to be most aware of are your sun sign, your moon sign, and your rising sign. And if you can figure out which signs those planets and that aspect, that rising aspect, occupied when you were born, that's going to give you a really nice outline of your own psyche. It's something I highly recommend just knowing for anybody. And once you have determined the signs that those planets occupy, you can see how you're relating without judgment, without expectation or need to change it right then and there. But just to know it's giving you an awareness tool, and then you can go from there.
Great. I think that's awesome advice. I think it's a great starting point. So again, it seems like it's important to emphasize astrology. So many healing modalities are about relationships. And if we think about, Chinese medicine, we think about the elements and their relationships to each other. And as you're emphasizing here, as we're talking about astrology, we're thinking about planets and how the planets relate to each other, and how then we as humans are relating to the planets and to our sky and to our earth and to really source energy. So if you want to talk about the relationships of energy and the relationships of, almost vibrational frequency, I would love to hear how that plays into astrology.
Well, essentially there are two sort of theories that make astrology, quote, work. And although we can't prove it, as we've mentioned, a lot of the healing modalities, like, we can't prove them, and that's okay. We know them to exist. We know them to work. And sometimes that's, no explanation necessary. So just to see, how astrology works for you, if you're interested, give it a try. And you might be surprised if you are a little skeptical. So getting past fear. And so the first planet essentially, the first theory essentially is that the planets in the universe are so large that they have a gravitational pull on the Earth. And because we're on the Earth, we're affected as well. So it's a very small effect. We sometimes have a likelier chance of picking up the energy of the person sitting next to us than we do of the larger planets. But the pull is there. In the East, they term that pull graha, or grip. They have a grip on us. And you can relate to this if there's a couple of free apps you can get that will tell you the sign of the moon on any given day. And as I mentioned, the moon changes signs the most frequently in our sky every 2.5 days or so. And you can do some research on your own, check in and see, if the moon in that certain sign for that day is causing you to feel a certain way. For example, moon in Aries, maybe you're finding yourself accomplishing some tasks or being active in the body, whereas moon in Cancer is going to perhaps cause you to want to stay indoors and tap into your emotional energy or wounds for that couple days or so. So that's a nice way to experiment if you're new or old to astrology. And so the second theory overall is that the birth chart sort of works like a clock. And if you look up in the sky currently, or if you just look at your natal chart, the planets themselves can be seen as hands on a clock, our evolutional clock. And as the current planets in the sky are sort of moving across our natal planets, or the position the planets were when we were born, that gives us a nice sense of timing, sort of like hands on a clock spinning around. So those are kind of like the two main theories for how astrology affects us on a vibrational level. And I like to think they both work. Yeah.
So as we start to think more and more about vibration, as we start to think more and more about consciousness and this idea of energy is matter, matter is energy, looking up at the sky, tuning into the planets, tuning into the constellations, is there something more than the novelty of like hanging out and looking at the sky? Like, is there an aspect of healing that comes from being with the stars, the planets, the moon, the skies?
Yeah, I think just philosophically speaking, knowing that the planets represent archetypes that correlate to our primal needs and desires, the archetypes within us, we automatically can feel a sense of connection to what's happening in the universe. I think spending time in reflection and contemplation, the more able we are to slow down and really reflect and meditate and dive into our subconscious, the more we can connect really with what's happening on the lunar scale, on the celestial scale. So it really, I think, is, when talking about connecting to what's happening above, we really need to let go of some of the stuff that we've accumulated on Earth, and ideas and even material possessions, that sort of can cloud this connection. And whether you want to connect it to the universe, to God, to spirit, to your angels, whatever they are, there's a sense of sort of responsibility here on Earth, to do that work, really, of clearing the subconscious of all the learned pattern and behavior. And I think modalities like yoga and meditation are great ways to get there, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah.
I love how you said this, clearing the subconscious of all learned behavior. It's so necessary.
Yeah. It can pile up and sneak up on us, and immense amount of work. I think spiritual work is some of the hardest work we'll do in our life for that reason. And it's not even that we get through it all in this lifetime. And, that's half of the logic behind why we might reincarnate, is because one lifetime is way too short to get through that.
Totally.
So, yeah.
So, okay. So let's dive in a little deeper here. So very often, you hear people saying, oh, Mercury's in retrograde, so everything's upside down. And sometimes I'm curious, do people know what that actually means? And then I'm also curious, what is actually going on? And is it going to be affecting more some people more than other people?
Yeah, it's an awesome question. Super talked about. So Mercury retrograde, big buzzword. Mercury spends a ton of time in retrograde. About 2 to 3 times a year, it will go retrograde. And that doesn't mean that it's moving backwards in the zodiac. It simply means that it's spinning so fast that it appears to be moving backwards. And astrology, once again, it cannot prove anything. However, you can track patterns and look at your life, and see how that transit, that planetary movement is affecting you. So Mercury, again, being the god of communication and intellect, he can, when he's moving retrograde, spinning so quickly, in fact, disturb things like travel plans or communication. Slow browser times can happen. Words can get confused and stuck. But there's an interesting thing, because Mercury happens retrograde 2 to 3 times a year. One person might be born with Mercury retrograde, and thus when the Mercury is spinning retrograde, in real time, that person might feel even more in touch with who they are, because they were born with that transit. So, contrary to popular belief, not all people are experiencing sort of disconnection during Mercury retrograde. Fascinating.
That makes a lot of sense. So is there a way to, Mercury goes into retrograde, right? It's just a thing that happens. So is there a way for us to live in a manner based upon, of course, our natal chart and our sign and so on? Is there a way for us to really be with that energy and harness the positive aspects of that energy, rather than sort of sinking into the thought process of everything's upside down and disconnected and falling apart?
Absolutely. So all the planets will go retrograde at some point or another. And when this happens, you can think of the theme of going backwards, not literally, but just apparently going backwards, taking these times to do some own reevaluating and reflecting and going back in your own life, and based on what's happened in the past, say 6 months to a year or whatever time have you, am I living my highest truth, or am I living in my highest vibration right now? Because sometimes it does take that ruminating or that going over, not so much ruminating, but at least looking backward and evaluating. from a place from the past. Hindsight is always 2020. So, you know, using these retrograde times as tools, as real tools toward forward progress. So if Mercury is in retrograde for several weeks, then during those several weeks, taking time to pause and sit with some energy and do some reflection is not a bad idea. Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So getting in touch with our astrology, alchemical astrology, is giving us a chance to tune in to our consciousness on a level that brings it outside of just the physical being that we are, and connecting us to the planet and the universe. So what about then other universes, other dimensions? What is that like? And does that play into astrology?
Great question. So as far as other universes, like I'm not very tuned or knowledgeable, I should say, about like the fifth dimension, sixth, seventh, eighth dimension worlds. So I don't know how helpful I can be on that sort of subject. But certainly, looking at the universe from here on Earth, I mean, looking at the sky, it's just a matter of like, what works for you? What are you feeling in your body that's resonating? Yeah.
I think that's a good answer. I think that's really what it's about, is what resonates, period. I think that's the answer to anything, right?
Oh, 100%. Yeah, totally. Yeah.
So Ashley, is there anything else that you feel you'd really like to share with our listeners today?
If you have a natal reading or a chart reading, or as just to wrap up our last thought, like if you're getting any advice from anybody, whether it's a yoga teacher, an astrologer, an energy healer, a practitioner, nobody knows the inner workings of your mind as well as you do. And nobody knows your soul's journey as well as you could potentially know. And so just to take everything, bit by bit, give yourself time to digest the information that you're choosing to be exposed to. It's such a gift you give yourself, really, in the long term. So definitely taking your time and seeking out someone that your heart, your soul will resonate with as far as healing is concerned, would be my best pieces of advice. And you can please feel free to reach out to me via my website, ridethewaveyoga.com. I provide natal readings and transit readings and one-on-one instruction. So it's my pleasure.
Excellent. So your website, ridethewaveyoga.com, and you are located in Newburyport, Massachusetts, and you've got some awesome classes in Newburyport, but you also do some online stuff. So you're accessible to our listeners all over. Absolutely.
Yes, Crystal.
Yay. Well, thank you so much, Ashley. This has been such a pleasure to have you and have this sacred, space and really feel that energy supported by the universe today.
It's so my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. Yeah.